Welcome to Yumi and All Things She. Our podcast is about all aspects of being a woman, from motherhood to careers, romantic relationships to family relationships and dynamics, and everything in between. It's a chance to learn, explore, and feel what's genuine and imagined as a woman in this world, along with multi-generational conversations that will stimulate your soul. So sit back, laugh, smile, and even cry a little along with us as we begin our journey together. You, me, and all things she. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Deb. I am so excited that you have decided to become part of this You, Me, and All Things She podcast. To kick off this whole entire program, I really thought it was important that I share a little bit about who I am in order for you to really connect and understand why this podcast is so important to me. To begin, it all started many years ago in the great small town of Mineral Wells, Texas. I was born, my dad, a helicopter pilot in the Army at the time where he was stationed, and my mother, a supporting, loving military wife, brought me into this wonderful world. And today they are still together. I was raised by both my birth parents. They just celebrated their 60th anniversary. A little bit about kind of my upbringing. Obviously, it was military. And in my early years, I don't remember a lot of moving around. However, once my mom and dad had kind of gotten to that point in his career where he was settling down and, looking at the possibility of retirement. And when I started kind of that kindergarten age, 5, 6 years old, things started to stabilize with our housing and living circumstances. And so at that point, we had lived in a couple of different places that I truly could remember enjoying. And before he decided to retire with his 20-year career. Part of my family structure, I've got one older brother, 3 years older than me. I have a younger sister, 7 years younger, 9-year younger brother. And so there are 4 of us in the family. And because of that age gap, we really grew up in 2 different types of parenting family lifestyles, which has lent itself to circumstances over the years of, adulting. And we'll talk about all those different topics, but also another family dynamic that we will more than likely uncover as we continue to move through the podcast together. In one of the things that I think is really important is I grew up in a very strong faith-based and religious home, which brought things with it that, most of us wouldn't necessarily think about or consider. And because there was this big separation and gap in years for me and my siblings, that caused even more differences in not how only we were raised, but how we were raised, just to kind of keep it as simple as we can. But as I mentioned, we'll kind of uncover and dig into those things because when you become an, early adult life, we don't really dig into or really understand and talk about those things. 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, we just go through different phases in each one of those areas of life. And there's some aha moments through each one of them. And, so that's been some of the things that we will discuss. We'll talk about relationships, which are something that is extremely important to me. So just back to the story, though, I grew up very conservative home. Both parents, as I mentioned, married for 60 years and still together to this day. Small town. My mom, midway through my dad's career, once that life and everything began to settle down for my dad and his career, my mom decided to go start her own and became a business owner in salons and a hair academy. So she kind of took on her career. Where my mid years through probably, and some of you may remember junior high days, but so that was where her career really took off. And of course, I had much younger siblings and had to tend to them, care for them, and all of that sort of stuff. And so I watched her through my adult life really be this entrepreneur. But what that brought with it as a family is all of a sudden this appearance to the community in which we lived, which now put extra pressure on and things that we needed to perform to in order to keep this image in the community. All things that we will discuss together as we kind of grow and become more about this woman that we all want to become. But those are some of the foundations early in life. Then I also, I married early. I had my first child. Within 8 months of that marriage, discovered that I was in a violent, abusive relationship that I was new to. I had no idea. I wasn't raised around that. My mother had grown up in a similar environment. And so from a distance, I was always told that how bad, how horrible that upbringing was, but didn't understand it until I was in there in that situation and relationships myself. So it didn't take long to realize that it was not where I wanted to be. And one of the aha moments that really chose for me to make a change for myself and for my daughter was, in counseling, one of them said, if you can't live this way, what makes you think your child can live this way? And that was a big aha moment for me because, so many times we made the excuse that we're doing this for our children, and it's just a justification to continue to do and what we're doing and leave it at status quo. So at that time, women weren't divorced. There weren't single parents. It was an unusual and unfamiliar circumstance for most of us. So, I had to deal with some of that psychological ramifications of what would come. We're this family in this small town. We've got a name. What reputation is it going to be? What's that going to look like? And, dealing with some of the shame and blame that comes with that. So one of the big hurdles I'd overcome, but a few short years later in my professional life, I started to take stride. I was working in a high-tech company and really making some progress, and met an amazing man, which I call my husband today. 32 years later, we have a second daughter together. He's just been an amazing father, an amazing man, amazing husband. And along with that, our first 15 years of marriage, we dealt with 5 different corporate downsizing and layoffs. And if that doesn't test a relationship, I don't know what would, but it does, believe it or not. If you've never experienced that, I think that, it's much more common these days that someone's going to experience that at some point in their life. But that causes a ton of stress, not only for the relationship, but families. And the one thing very early on, after our youngest daughter was a year old, we decided that it was in our best interest to move away from family. So we took the plunge and moved 14 driving hours away, several hundred miles away from any support, any family. But we decided at that time that was what was best for us. And not only a newly married couple with 2 young children, packing up our house and going with no jobs. So you could talk about stress and life-changing circumstances. Well, we had it straight up. So, they back in the day, they used to say that if you don't have family support near you, your marriage is either going to come together and grow stronger, or it's going to tear itself apart. And, what we found is that it truly was the foundation of what brought us together. And we had no one else to rely on but one another. So, a lot of things that we will talk about in future podcasts, we will uncover because of the relationship and circumstances that we've experienced, my husband and I. But that started my corporate journey. I was a working mom. I had 2 young daughters to tend to, and but we had things to do. We had life to get going, and so I joined this corporate world and quickly discovered that I had great opportunities. I was a stay-at-home mom for 6 months, about approximately, off and on throughout my daughter's young lives, and my husband was too. So we were both very fortunate to be able to stay home with them off and on. But yet I knew that there was more to my life than just being a stay-at-home mom. And I commend women that have made that choice, because it takes a lot of due diligence. It takes a lot of commitment. And I just knew that for me, my personal situation, I needed to have adult interaction. And so I chose to continue to grow in the corporate world. Training and development was where I was really drawn to. I've done a lot of different things in the corporate world, until I discovered that self-employment might be a better way. And so, through the encouragement of my husband and his entrepreneurial spirit and desires in life, then we have also now owned our own business for the last 15, 20 years. And that's brought its own challenges. It's brought its own unique differences from what corporate life will. So now there's time management and all those other things and aspects, the fluctuation of income potentially. And one of the things I think that has been so significantly important is that my husband and I work together. So not only do we do this thing called life and raise this family and have this marriage, but we also are business partners and, work side by side. And that kind of creates some other situations and things that we can talk about as we move forward in the podcast. So I've got two beautiful daughters that are now grown women, have their own children, have their own families. We have 5 grandkids. And so, over the years, those relationships, not only with one another, but with other family members, and the dynamic of having a family business that my mother had and some of the circumstances that were presented there have really brought me to a place of passion to help others and to help other women that may be either struggling with the abuse and the things that verbal and physical abuse can bring. But I also want to help those relationships and marriages that are struggling. Thank you for being there. Because when you don't have family and support, or even if they do have family and support present, they don't always understand. And so it's important that you connect with those that have been there, that understand. I'll talk about some of the stories as I was going through my divorce, things that were said from people that thought they loved me. And unfortunately, it didn't come across that way at the time. And so we'll dig into some of those as we go through the podcast together. But I thank you for letting me be vulnerable and being present. And I look forward to us being on this journey together, because together we can be stronger. Together we can support one another, and together we can conquer this world in a great way. So thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. And I look forward to a plethora of topics that we as women can talk about moving forward. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. So you thought you'd get away? Well, not quite yet. You've got to be sure and click the bell and subscribe in order to not miss an episode coming up. I cannot do this by myself. So you've got to subscribe and connect with all of the other women that are going to be part of the You, Me, and All Things She podcast group. So please be sure and click the subscribe button below. And also, if you would put in the comments for me any topics that you'd like to discuss. This is not just about me. As the title says, it's You, Me, and All Things She. And I want to be sure and talk about those items and those topics that are important to you. So if you would, please put them in the comments below, and we will see you in the very next podcast. Until then, make it a great day.